I mean, they need to think of things that really hurt Russia. Now, if you put pressure on China and India through secondary sanctions, that could help, and that would be good to do that sooner rather than later.
The US President Donald Trump has threatened Vladimir Putin with sanctions if he can't agree to a ceasefire in Ukraine. He issued an ultimatum to the Russian president that 100% tariff would be placed on those buying the country's exports unless a peace deal is reached by September.
But we're very, very unhappy with them, and we're going to be doing very severe tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. Tariffs at about 100%. You'd call them secondary tariffs. You know what that means.
Donald Trump there. He also confirmed a deal has been made to send weapons to NATO.
We are going to be sending them weapons, and they're going to be paying for them. The United States, will not be having any payment made. We are not buying it, but we will manufacture it, and they're going to be paying for it. So in a nutshell, we're going to make top-of-the-line weapons, and they'll be sent to NATO. NATO may choose to have certain of them sent to other countries where we can get a little additional speed, where the country will release something and it'll be mostly in the form of a replacement.
Secondary tariffs, to explain them, by the way, for example, if India keeps buying oil from Russia, US companies that purchase Indian goods would have to pay 100% import tax or tariff when the products reach American shores. So they're secondary tariffs. Donald Trump also suggested that his patience with Putin was wearing thin.
I speak to him a lot about getting this thing done. And I always hang up and say, well, that was a nice phone call. And then missiles are launched into Kiev or some other city. And I said, it's strange. And after that happens 3 or 4 times, you say, the talk doesn't mean anything. My conversations with him are always very pleasant. I say, isn't that a very lovely conversation? And then the missiles go off that night. I go home, I tell the First Lady, I spoke with Vladimir today. We had a wonderful conversation. She said, oh, really? Another city was just hit. So it's like, look, he's, I don't want to say he's an assassin, but he's a tough guy.
Well, let's get some analysis now from Karen von Hippel, who is a Chair of Defence and Security Practice at Ardent Strategies and Director General of the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI. Karen, good evening to you.
Good evening. I'm the former Director General.
Oh, apologies. Former Director General of RUSI. Well, look, thank you for being with us and lending your expertise. Can we just talk weaponry first of all? It is understood that this supply of weapons, which Donald Trump said earlier, could account for billions of dollars worth, could include Patriot missiles. He didn't give us that exact detail today, but we are expecting some serious fire and defensive power here, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, it's intended for defensive primarily. It sounds like anyway, you never know. He changes his mind, as we all know. But certainly Patriot missiles and interceptors to protect the skies over Ukrainian cities, because, of course, he's killing civilians across Ukraine with all sorts of long-range weapons. At the moment, I don't think they're going to be providing Ukraine with offensive weapons that could take out some of these, but hopefully that'll be on the table. They have some long-range weapons. They've been able to take out some of the missiles, a couple hundred miles inside Russia, but it's really not clear. It's always hard to tell with Donald Trump because he says one thing one day and another day, and so he's obviously getting frustrated. I thought that comment about Melania Trump was quite interesting because I hadn't heard that before, and that's actually good that she's actually telling him what's going on.
Yeah, I think so too. And it does put kind of a personal element to it as well, like he is affected by the huge amounts of lives lost. I mean, he constantly talks about that in his frustration at trying to get the war ended, something he thought he would do very, very quickly, but has been unable to do so far. I think there have been sort of 2 other instances where we've come close to a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, but ultimately he hasn't achieved that yet. What is today? Is it part of the journey there? Is it what will get a ceasefire deal over the line? How much is your faith in what you've heard today?
Good question. I'm not sure we've ever been that close to a real ceasefire because, of course, Russia Russia's goals are so, contrary to anything the Ukrainians would ever agree with. They basically want to take over most of the country. They want to subsume Ukrainian culture or deny it even exists. I also thought it was quite interesting that Trump is giving Russia 50 days, and 50 days is far more than most of the countries in terms of tariff threats are getting, right? I mean, I think your show earlier said 2 weeks till August, or 2.5 weeks or so, or 3 weeks till tariffs are put on. He's always been a bit reluctant to punish Putin, which no one really understands why. Everyone has their own strange theory about it. But I think he is realizing, as most people do who haven't been involved in international politics, that these things are much messier than one realizes. And there are many stages, right? It's not just about bringing people to the table and getting them to agree on a ceasefire, but then it's implementing it and making sure it's implemented properly, and that, the sides don't slip back into war, which we've seen, obviously, right, with Israel and Hamas several times now. So I think, it's certainly a learning curve for him, but let's just hope this time he does the right thing. He's under pressure by some Republican senators and members of the House, Senator Lindsey Graham and Senator Blumenthal, who is a Democrat. Lindsey Graham's a Republican. The two of them together have been pushing quite hard. I mean, I was in Ukraine last summer and I saw the two senators, and including Lindsey Graham, the Republican, promising the Ukrainians, we won't leave you, we're there to support you. So I think there are some Republicans that are quietly behind the scenes lobbying Trump very hard, and that's why they have the bill prepared, which would actually have 500% in secondary sanctions, not just the 100% you mentioned before. He hasn't yet committed to supporting that bill, but he sees it as a threat. It would be great if he actually supported the bill, and they started that right away.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that 500%, and as you say, those two senators were really trying to encourage Donald Trump to get behind a bill that they'd proposed, talking about tariffs on that level. In fact, the Moscow Stock Exchange rose sharply today, Karen, because they were relieved not to have had a harsher measure. So just
interesting.
Yeah,
interesting.
It just goes to show how, if you're kind of going to be taco Trump about it, if you're going to keep sort of threatening things, and then, chickening out. Trump always chickens out, taco. If you're going to keep doing that, then A, do we take this 100% threat of tariffs seriously? B, it's not as bad as Russia was expecting, and that caused a boon in their stock exchange today. So it just right. I mean, it just illustrates how words can mean everything and nothing all at the same time, right?
Right. I mean, he's sort of wolf or sheep crying wolf too often, but also, don't forget that there aren't, if you don't account for the secondary tariffs, they're also threatening tariffs on Russia. Well, the trade is minimal now because obviously the sanctions have been in place for a couple of years now. And so if additional sanctions go on U.S.-Russia trade, that's not going to have much of an impact. Yeah. I mean, they need to think of things that really hurt Russia. Now, if you put pressure on China and India through secondary sanctions, that could help, and that would be good to do that sooner rather than later. They would stop buying maybe as much Russian oil and gas, which has been obviously propping up the Russian economy. But yes, it's just I think at some point a lot of this just turns into noise, which is I think what you're hinting at, and then maybe people just start to ignore him. Really, it's hard to say. But look, we're going in the right direction this time. I mean, it was very frustrating. I think it was about 2 weeks ago when the Pentagon said, "Oh, we need all this stuff at home. We're going to stop supplying Ukraine." Some people think it was the Undersecretary USDP Defense Policy, Elbridge Colby, who made that decision. He's focused on China, but it's hard to say right now. And at the end of the day, it's Trump who's pretty much making every decision. So people who work for him really are often left in the dark.
Yeah, and that's what I suppose we're all dealing with, but much more important to those people who are actually working alongside him, and markets and countries who are trying to respond and work out how to form a relationship with Donald Trump. But he still wields an enormous amount of power. He is probably the only individual world leader who could bring about peace between Russia and Ukraine, and maybe arguably between Israel and Hamas as well. It's just how he gets there, and maybe maybe we're just seeing a man trying lots of different ways to try and bring about an ambition that he wants to realise, which will only do the world good, I suppose. At the end, I'm being very kind to Donald Trump.
Yeah, you are being very kind.
But I mean, who else is trying to end wars?
Well,
I suppose.
a very good point. I mean, I think, well, of course, European powers have tried; they haven't been successful. I also think Putin would listen to President Xi of China, but so far Xi has not put the right kind of pressure on Putin to end the war. And I know when Biden was president, a lot of Americans and Europeans, Brits and others were quietly talking to China about trying to put more pressure on Russia. It's not clear that they're interested in ending this war. I think they like the fact that America and Europe is distracted and expending a lot of military supplies in Ukraine. They don't mind Russia becoming the weaker power. But Trump, part of the problem with Trump is he gets so distracted that he doesn't stay focused on a particular issue. He's got one guy who he seems to trust, and then pretty much everybody else who he could use to help implement his strategies are, sort of hanging around a lot of the time. So if it's not Steve Witkoff, who's actually his envoy to the Middle East, I think, but he seems to do everything else, then, he doesn't use the Secretary of State enough. He doesn't use others who actually, could push much harder if they knew what the strategy was. Yeah. The problem is it goes all over the place, and so it's very hard for them to do it.
There was a classic moment last week when he was sat next to Pete Hegseth and they were talking about the halt on weapons to Ukraine, and then he sort of seemed to change his mind and then got a bit confused when someone asked him a question and said, well, you better ask him, pointing to Pete Hegseth. He must have thought at that time, like, what do I say? Are we going with weapons in? Has that halt been stopped? And there are plenty of weapons waiting in Poland to go across. So, point taken. Look, Karen, really good to speak to you. Thank you. Karen von Hippel, who is chair of the Defence and Security Practice at Ardern Strategies and former Director General of the Royal United Services Institute. Good to have you with us.